Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe heroes come in the most unexpected places, hit that like button. Because the quiet man you're about to meet spent decades finding the unfindable. And when a little girl's safety was at stake, his cover was about to be blown. His name was Henry Patterson, and at 52, he had perfected the art of being invisible. Every morning at exactly 8:15 a.m., he would unlock the front doors of Millbrook Public Library, flip on the lights, and begin another day of what the townspeople assumed was a simple, quiet life among books and silence. To the residents of Millbrook, Henry was just the middle-aged librarian who had appeared in their small Vermont town 3 years ago. Polite but distant, helpful but never intrusive, the kind of man who could organize a card catalog with military precision but seemed to struggle with basic conversation. Parents dropping off their teenagers for study sessions barely noticed him. College students researching papers treated him like part of the furniture. Even the other library staff saw him as the reliable, unremarkable man who kept the computer systems running and never called in sick. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Henry Patterson had spent the previous 20 years as one of the Army's most effective missing person specialists. His official title had been intelligence analyst, but his real job was finding people. Hostages in foreign countries, POWs in enemy territory, missing soldiers in hostile environments, and civilians caught in war zones. He had tracked targets through jungles, cities, mountains, and deserts. He could read human behavior like a map, analyze search patterns like a chess master, and find needles in haystacks when the haystack was an entire continent. But that was before the incident in Afghanistan, before the operation that went wrong and the injuries that ended his career, before the decision to disappear into small-town America and try to forget that he had ever been anything more than ordinary. This Tuesday morning started like any other. Henry arranged returned books, helped a college student locate research materials on local history, and troubleshot a printer that had been jamming since the Clinton administration. The library hummed with its usual peaceful energy, teenagers pretending to study while texting, elderly residents reading newspapers, and the soft clicking of keyboards mixing with whispered conversations. At 11:23 a.m., that peace shattered. The front doors burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. A man in his mid-30s stumbled inside, his face pale with panic, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Behind him, a woman followed, moving with the mechanical precision of someone fighting off complete breakdown. "Please," the man gasped, addressing no one in particular, "we need to use your phone. Our daughter, she's missing." The library went dead quiet. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. Mrs. Rodriguez, the head librarian, immediately rushed over from the reference desk. Of course, she said, guiding them toward the main desk. "What happened? How long has she been gone?" "Since this morning," the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, she's 8. She was supposed to walk to school, but she never arrived. We've been driving around for 2 hours, checking everywhere. The neighbors are helping, but computer help desk, 20 feet away." Training he thought he'd buried began stirring in the back of his mind. Automatic observations started cataloging themselves, the parents' stress levels, their body language, the timeline they described. The father was showing signs of panic escalation, rapid breathing, inability to focus, defensive posturing. The mother was in early-stage shock, controlled movements, monotone voice, delayed reactions. "We need to call the police," the father continued, pulling out his phone. "But our cell service is terrible out here, and—" "Use our landline," Mrs. Rodriguez offered immediately. "Henry, can you help them with?" "I've got it," Henry said quietly, stepping forward. But as he approached, something in his demeanor shifted. Without realizing it, he was moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to crisis situations. His voice, when he spoke, carried a calm authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "Sir, ma'am, I'm Henry. Before you call anyone, can you tell me exactly what happened this morning?" The father looked at him with barely contained irritation. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but we really need to get the authorities involved. This isn't time for—" "David," The mother interrupted gently, placing a hand on her husband's arm. Let him help. David Miller was a successful insurance adjuster, accustomed to being the one in control, the one with answers. The idea of taking direction from a small-town librarian while his daughter was missing felt like wasting precious time. But his wife, Sarah, had already begun responding to Henry's question, explained. She walks the same route every day, down Maple Street, left on Oak, then 3 blocks to Lincoln Elementary. It's maybe a 10-minute walk. When the school called at 9:30 to say she wasn't there, what did you do immediately after getting that call? Henry asked. We drove the route, David said impatiently. Obviously, we checked with neighbors, we called her friends' parents, we went to the park, the playground, everywhere we could think of. Look, we appreciate whatever you think you're doing here, but you're just a librarian. What could you possibly know about finding missing children? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Henry went completely still for a moment, and something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but the kind of calculation that comes from years of life-or-death decision-making. You're right, Henry said simply. I'm just a librarian, but I've lived in this town for 3 years, and I know every building, every back road, every place an 8-year-old might go if she was scared, confused, or trying to hide. He turned to Sarah, his voice gentle but focused. Has Emma been having any problems at school lately? Any issues with friends, teachers, bullying? Sarah's eyes widened slightly. How did you? She mentioned something last week about some older kids teasing her at recess, but she said it wasn't a big deal. Henry nodded. And this morning, was there anything different about her behavior? Did she seem nervous, excited, upset? She was quiet, Sarah admitted. Quieter than usual. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, but you had the feeling she wasn't telling the truth, Henry finished. Yes, exactly. David was growing more frustrated. Look, this is all Sir, Henry interrupted quietly. In cases involving missing children, the first few hours are critical. But statistically, most children who go missing voluntarily, children who make a conscious decision not to go where they're supposed to go, are found within a 3-mile radius of their intended destination. They're usually hiding somewhere they feel safe, somewhere familiar. David stared at him. Statistically? What the hell are you talking about? She's 8 years old. 8-year-olds are remarkably resourceful when they're frightened or trying to solve a problem they think adults won't understand. Henry continued, his voice remaining calm despite David's rising anger. If Emma was being bullied and didn't feel comfortable talking about it, she might have decided to avoid school today. The question is, where would she go? Henry turned to Sarah again. Does Emma have any special places? Anywhere she goes when she wants to be alone or feels safe? Sarah was nodding slowly, her reporter's instincts recognizing that Henry was asking exactly the right questions. There's an old oak tree behind the Hendersons' property. She likes to climb it and read. And there's a little creek that runs behind the grocery store. She collects smooth stones there. We checked both places, David snapped. First thing we did. Did you call for her, or did you search quietly? Henry asked. David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, looking confused. If she's hiding because she's scared or ashamed, Henry explained, calling her name might make her hide deeper. Children often interpret adult voices as anger, especially when they know they've done something they're not supposed to do. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. Henry, how do you know all this? Henry hesitated for just a moment. It wasn't technically a lie. Finding missing persons was definitely crisis intervention. He just left out the part about doing it in war zones with hostile forces shooting at him. Look, David said, his patience finally snapping, I don't care if you used to be a guidance counselor or a social worker or whatever. My daughter is missing, and standing here, talking isn't finding her. Sarah, we're calling the police. Now. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. Henry watched him for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Mrs. Rodriguez, Henry said quietly, can you pull up the local area map on your computer? The detailed one with property boundaries? Henry, what are you thinking? She asked, but she was already moving toward her workstation. Emma didn't disappear, Henry said, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. 8-year-olds don't vanish. They go somewhere. The question is understanding her logic. He turned back to Sarah. You said she was quiet this morning. In my experience, when children are planning to avoid something they're afraid of, they often scout their hiding places in advance. Has Emma been anywhere unusual in the past few days? Any places she asked about or seemed curious about? Sarah's face was brightening as she followed Henry's reasoning. Yesterday afternoon, she asked me about the old Morrison factory. She wanted to know why it was empty and if anyone ever went there. The Morrison factory? Mrs. Rodriguez called from her computer. That place has been abandoned for 15 years. It's not safe. There are broken windows, exposed wiring. It's also less than half a mile from the school route, Henry said, studying the map on her screen. If Emma decided she couldn't face another day of bullying, and if she remembered asking about a place where no one ever goes, I think she's somewhere she believes adults won't look for her, Henry replied. Somewhere she can hide until she figures out how to solve her problem, or until she gets hungry enough to come home. Henry studied the map more closely, his mind automatically analyzing approach routes, sight lines, and accessibility. Without realizing it, he was thinking like the tactical specialist he used to be. The factory has 3 main buildings, he continued. The administrative building would be locked and probably too difficult for a child to access. The main manufacturing floor would be too open, nowhere to hide effectively. But the old storage building, he pointed to a smaller structure on the map, that would have individual rooms, places where someone could hide and still see if anyone was coming. Sarah grabbed David's arm. It makes sense. She's smart enough to know we'd check the obvious places first, and scared enough to pick somewhere she thought we'd never think to look. David was wavering between hope and skepticism. But how could you possibly know? Because, Henry said quietly, frightened children think a lot like frightened adults. They want somewhere defensible with multiple exit routes and clear sight lines. The only difference is their definition of safe doesn't always match ours. Mrs. Rodriguez was staring at Henry with new eyes. Henry, what exactly did you do before you came to work here? Henry realized he had said too much, revealed too much of the analytical framework that had guided 20 years of high-stakes operations. But Emma Miller didn't have time for him to worry about blown cover. I found people, he said simply. People who didn't want to be found. The library had gone completely quiet again. Even the teenagers had stopped pretending to study and were listening intently. We need to check that factory, Sarah said decisively. I'll drive, Henry offered. I know exactly where it is. David looked like he was struggling with accepting help from someone he dismissed minutes earlier. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation won. Fine, he said. But if she's not there, we're calling the police immediately. Agreed, Henry said. Mrs. Rodriguez, can you call Officer Jackson? Tell him we're checking the Morrison factory and we'll report back in 30 minutes. If we don't find her there, we'll need to expand the search. Officer Jackson was Millbrook's only full-time police officer, and Mrs. Rodriguez nodded as she reached for the phone. The drive to the Morrison factory took exactly 7 minutes. Henry drove with the calm precision of someone who had navigated much more dangerous terrain, while David sat in the passenger seat, radiating nervous energy, and Sarah clutched her phone in the back. The factory complex looked exactly like what it was, a relic of better economic times, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. Windows were broken or boarded up, and rust stains streaked down the metal siding like tears. God, David muttered. She could be hurt in there. There could be broken glass, unstable floors. Children are remarkably good at avoiding immediate physical dangers, Henry said, parking near what he had identified as the storage building. Their risk assessment is actually quite sophisticated when it comes to things like sharp edges and unstable surfaces. It's emotional dangers they struggle to evaluate. As they approached the building, Henry's training took over completely. He automatically noted wind direction. Voices would carry better from the east side. Structural integrity. The building was sound despite its appearance. And potential entry points. A broken window about 4 feet off the ground showed fresh scuff marks on the sill. There, he said quietly, pointing to the window. Someone small climbed through there recently. David started toward the building, but Henry caught his arm. Wait, Henry said. If she's in there and she's scared, We need to approach this carefully. If she thinks she's in trouble, she might hide deeper or even try to run. What do you suggest? Sarah asked. Henry considered the situation. Sarah, you called to her. Not angry, not panicked. Just normal, like you're calling her for dinner. David and I will position ourselves where we can see the other exits, just in case. It was pure tactical thinking. Contain the area, use the most trusted voice for contact, prepare for multiple contingencies. Henry realized he was operating on pure instinct now, 20 years of experience overriding 3 years of trying to be ordinary. They spread out around the building. Sarah positioned herself near the broken window and called out in a voice that was perfectly controlled despite her fear. Emma? Sweetheart, it's Mom. Are you in there? Silence. Emma, you're not in trouble. We just want to make sure you're okay. More silence. Then, so quietly they almost missed it, a small voice from inside the building. I don't want to go to school. The relief that washed over Sarah's face was visible even from 20 feet away. I know, baby. You don't have to go to school today. Can you come out so we can talk about it? Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. A few moments later, a small figure appeared at the broken window. Emma Miller was exactly what Henry had expected. A bright, resourceful 8-year-old who had solved her immediate problem in the most logical way she could think of. She was dirty but unharmed, clutching a small backpack and looking more embarrassed than frightened. David was at the window in seconds, helping her climb down and wrapping her in a hug that lifted her completely off the ground. Emma, we were so scared, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Why didn't you go to school? The big kids said they were going to put my head in the toilet, Emma replied matter-of-factly. I didn't want to deal with that today. Sarah joined the hug, and for a moment the three of them just held each other while Henry stood a respectful distance away. Finally, David looked up. How did you know? He asked Henry. How did you know exactly where she'd be? Henry hesitated. He could deflect, make something up, maintain the cover he'd worked 3 years to establish. But looking at this family, at the trust in their eyes, he found he couldn't lie. Because, he said quietly, I spent 20 years finding people who didn't want to be found. Missing soldiers, hostages, POWs, civilians caught in war zones. I was an Army intelligence specialist, and finding people was my job. The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence in the library. This was the silence of understanding, of pieces clicking into place. That's why you asked the right questions, Sarah said slowly. That's why you knew about the psychology, the statistics, the behavior patterns. Henry nodded. When someone goes missing, especially a child, the first few hours are critical. But most of the time, people don't vanish. They go somewhere that makes sense to them, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. David extended his hand. I owe you an apology. And a thank you. I am sorry. You don't owe me anything, Henry interrupted. You were scared for your daughter. That's exactly what you should have been. Back toward town, Emma chattered about her hiding place, her reasons for avoiding school, and her plans for dealing with the bullying situation now that her parents knew about it. Henry listened from the front seat, noting that she was processing the experience in exactly the way a resilient child should, treating it as a problem she had solved rather than a crisis she had caused. When they arrived back at the library, word had already spread. Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the door with relief written all over her face, and Officer Jackson was waiting to take a brief report. Mr. Patterson, Officer Jackson said after getting the basic details, that was some impressive work. Most people would have started with a grid search of the immediate area. Most people don't think like 8-year-olds, Henry replied. Officer Jackson studied him carefully. You know, we've been looking for someone to help with our emergency response training. Someone with experience in search and rescue operations. Would you be interested in consulting on a volunteer basis? Henry glanced around the library, at Mrs. Rodriguez, who was smiling encouragingly, at the patrons who had witnessed the morning's events, at the Miller family, who were looking at him with something approaching awe. I'm just a librarian, he said. No, Emma piped up from her father's arms. You're a finder. You find people. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward. Henry, I don't know what made you think you had to hide who you were, but this community could use someone with your skills. whether that's finding missing children or helping our emergency services improve their response protocols. Henry realized that his carefully constructed ordinary life had just been demolished by an 8-year-old girl with a bullying problem. But looking at the faces around him, grateful, respectful, welcoming, he found he didn't mind. Later that evening, after the Millers had gone home and the library had returned to its normal quiet routine, Henry sat at his desk thinking about the day's events. Mrs. Rodriguez approached with 2 cups of coffee and settled into the chair across from him. "So," she said, "Army intelligence. That explains a few things, such as why you organize our emergency supply closet like a military depot, why you can troubleshoot our security system better than the company that installed it, why you read people like their books written in a language only you understand." Henry sipped his coffee. "I came here because I wanted to be normal, ordinary. After 20 years of high-stakes operations and life-or-death decisions, I thought I wanted quiet. And now," Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Now I think maybe quiet and purposeless aren't the same thing." The next morning, Henry arrived at the library to find a handmade card taped to his desk. It was decorated with crayon drawings of books and stick figures and signed, "Thank you for finding me. Love, Emma." Inside, in a child's careful handwriting, was a message that made him smile. "You're the best finder ever. Can you teach me how to find things, too?" Henry tucked the card into his desk drawer, right next to his old Army commendation letters and the phone number Officer Jackson had left for the emergency services consultant position. Some secrets, he realized, were meant to be kept. Others were meant to be shared when the right moment arrived. And some heroes really did come in the most unexpected places, even behind the quiet desk of a small-town library, where a man who had spent 20 years finding the unfindable had been waiting for the day when someone would need finding again.